Good afternoon and welcome to Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station, 98.1 FM and AM 1220. Good to be back with you today on another foray into the world of politics and the pulpit. Got a couple of quick shameless plugs I like to throw out. For those of you that are interested in cutting up the state of California, whatever that means or looks like to you, maybe you're one of those individuals who actually wants to stay in California because you actually love the state and don't necessarily care for the politics, but you love the state. This Saturday at the Freedom's Way Baptist Church from 11 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., the New California group will be meeting. I think their main speaker is Paul Preston. And if you are interested in coming out to that, you can go on Facebook, check out the New California group. And again, this coming Saturday, I think that's July 15th, if I'm not mistaken, 11 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. Also, I had a little bit of a brain freeze for those of you who thought that we would have former State Senator Mike Morrell on today. Actually, he's on next Wednesday, a week from today. But today, at the bottom of the hour, we will be talking to Brad Dacus with Pacific Justice Institute and talking to him about the recent Supreme Court decisions a couple of weeks ago, as well as some of the interesting things that are on the dais for Pacific Justice Institute. So at 2:30 today, Brad will be on the program. So looking forward to hearing from Brad. Hopefully you'll stick around to hear that. How many of you had the opportunity the past few days to maybe see the movie Sound of Freedom? I know that it was not heavily promoted. In fact, 5 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, I think this movie was pitched to Disney, Buena Vista, and they wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. But here we are 5 years later, and some independent distributor picked it up. And as of today, it is approaching $50 million at the box office. It's amazing. It stars Jim Caviezel. Some of you guys might remember him from The Passion of Christ, the old Mel Gibson movie from, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, and several other movies as well as Mira Sorvino. Now, it is a sad movie, it is an infuriating movie, and it is a liberating movie and an exhorting movie. It's all of those at the same time. In fact, I think a movie should do that. A movie should kind of help you to forget about some things, but unfortunately it does deal with child trafficking, child sex trafficking in particular, and it is based upon some true accounts of a former Homeland Security agent that did some things on his own before he finally left Homeland Security. But anyway, neither here nor there. All I'm saying is this: the movie has made almost $50 million to date without any advertisement from the mainstream media or any major reviews from any major reviewers. Now, what I do find interesting is how some of the mainstream outlets are reporting the fact that this movie has made so much without any kind of mainstream recognition at all. Let me just give you a few headlines here from two mainline organizations. The first is Rolling Stone. This is a headline from Rolling Stone over this past weekend. It says, "Box office triumph for QAnon believers." Now, I don't know anything about QAnon. I guess I'm a little stupid about that kind of stuff. I'm not Mr. Conspiracy Theory. I'm not one that looks over my head and says, I wonder if those are clouds or chemtrails. But all I can tell you is, why is Rolling Stone making this accusation about the movie? Are they insinuating that there is no such thing as child sex trafficking? Then The Guardian. The Guardian is, by all estimations, a leftist publication. And here is their headline for the success of Sound of Freedom. Quote, "QAnon adjacent thriller seducing America." Of course, seducing was a poor choice of words, or perhaps maybe a choice of words that were intentional. But these guys are trying to poo-poo the notion that this movie is at all trying to bring attention to the fact that there is indeed heinous child sex trafficking happening, not only here in California, where according to what I have read, we are the #1 state for human traffic cases, human sex traffic cases. And this is a problem not only here in California, but of course across the United States in various locations, and of course globally. Now, the problem is, if you remember a few years ago, I don't know, it was during the Hillary Clinton campaign, I think, there was this thing called Pizzagate. And in Pizzagate, supposedly Hillary and these people, you know, were sex trafficking kids to somehow take their blood out or something like that. It's just some stupid, weird thing. And they were drinking the blood. I don't know. I can just tell you that it's dumb. I'm going to talk real quickly to my board operator because he's looking at me with intensity right now. Shane, do you remember anything about the Pizzagate incident?
Oh, it sounds vaguely familiar, which is why I'm trying to scratch my brain for more information. I can do a quick Google for you and get some background.
Please do that for me, because I remember when it was a big deal and it was gaining some steam. And so I think that's why Rolling Stone and Guardian are connecting this movie, Sound of Freedom, to the QAnon conspiracy. What does it say there, Shane?
All right, so everybody's favorite source, according to Wikipedia.
Oh, yeah,
the first thing
that obviously final authority for all matters.
It can be edited, but for the sake of a speedy analysis of the the Pizzagate, according to Wikipedia, it says it is a conspiracy theory that went viral during the 2016 U.S. presidential election cycle involving then-candidate Hillary Clinton. In March 2016, the personal email account of John Podesta, Hillary Clinton's campaign chair, was hacked in a spear phishing attack. WikiLeaks published his emails in November 2016. Proponents of the Pizzagate conspiracy theory falsely claimed the emails contained coded messages that connected several high-ranking Democratic Party officials and U.S. restaurants with an alleged human trafficking and child sex ring. One of the establishments allegedly involved was the Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria in Washington, D.C.
That's right, the Comet Pizzeria. How would you like your human trafficking today, with or without pepperoni? All I can tell you is I can't give you all of the incidentals of all that stuff. And is there some sort of child trafficking happening within higher officials? Who knows? If it is, Lord willing, that truth will come out. But the fact is, I think this is what they are referencing in both Rolling Stone and The Guardian, why they are saying this is a QAnon-tinged movie. But either way, it is making a dent at the box office. It has beat the new Indiana Jones movie with the octogenarian Harrison Ford, who, by the way, is the same age as the President of the United States, 80 years old, but yet seems to have a little more energy, obviously. By the way, how many of you saw the video of Joe Biden on the beach last weekend? Was that not just a great view of the president? I mean, just kind of shifting the chair from one side to the other and grabbing a bag. It just looked like this was confidence enduring when we saw that. All I can tell you is it did not look good. But I say all of that about this movie Sound of Freedom to say this. Today, California Public Safety Committee blocked a bill that would have made human child sex trafficking a serious felony here in California. Now, I just told you a few moments ago that child sex trafficking is like the #1 thing here in California in terms of cases. We are #1. And I think there's a lot of that happening up in the high desert and down south of us into San Diego, and it is pretty evident. In fact, we've been hearing about child sex trafficking cases for years and years and years, and all of a sudden now we're supposed to assume that the preponderance of these things are scams or conspiracies. But there was a bill that went through the committee that was passed by the state Senate. It's called HB 14, House Bill 14. And one actually there were 6 Democrats in particular, but one particular Democrat, Reggie Joan Sawyer, from the Democratic Assembly here in Los Angeles, was one of the holdouts on this bill. And again, all this bill would do, folks, listen closely, is simply make it a serious felony. Not just a felony, but a serious felony if you are caught sex trafficking a minor. That's all this bill would do. And I say that's all. I think that there's some other things that should happen to somebody who does this kind of things to minor or to a minor, or anybody for that matter. But you should probably give the offices of Reggie Joan Sawyer a call. You can Google his name, Reggie Joan Sawyer, and call and say, why did you block this bill, House Bill 14, from passing and making child sex trafficking a serious felony here in California? It is amazing to me that you can do all kinds of things in this state. You can even rob up to $995 at a store, and it would only be a slap on your wrist. But yet, when it comes to something as serious and heinous and disgusting as trafficking minors for the purpose of sex, and you guys out there in la-la leftist land think that that's a little too, a bridge too far, I think some of you guys need to really consider where your morals are. But enough about human sex trafficking. Oh, we're getting close, aren't we? I want to quickly talk about what the Johnson Amendment is, because I kind of promised some folks that I would do this, but I don't know how much time I'm going to be able to have to devote to this, so I might carry this over to our guest that's coming up here in a little bit. But some of you know that churches are, by extension, 501c3. But in 1954, then Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson, who would then go on to be president, of course, after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, put together what was called, in his name, the Johnson Amendment, which basically stated that in order for churches to maintain a 501c3 status, that they could not engage in politics from the pulpit. That means either endorsing or not endorsing a candidate or legislation from the pulpit of a church. Now, it doesn't matter that prior to 1954, churches could do this no matter what. I mean, for the past 2,000 years leading up to 1954, churches were doing this. And also, think about all of the Democratic candidates down through the decades who have gone into churches and basically politicked from the pulpits of predominantly black churches in the South. When we come back on Politics in the Pulpit, we are going to play a clip, probably one of my favorite clips, from then candidate Hillary Clinton brandishing her black accent during the 2008 campaign at a black church in the South. And you'll remember it because it's one of those ear-wrenching moments in history. When we return here on Politics and the Pulpit on your hometown station. We're still waiting for our guest to call in. Hopefully Brad is not, I don't know, maybe in a court case or something like that, standing in front of the Supreme Court. Who knows what Brad's doing right now, but Lord willing, he'll call in here very, very shortly. But I was talking about at the top of the hour about the nonprofit statuses of churches. And I had mentioned that in 1954, it became necessary for then Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson to somehow say that churches needed to have a 501c3 status. I'll go ahead and read it to you. It says the Johnson Amendment is an addition adopted in 1954 to the Internal Revenue Code as a condition for maintaining exception from income taxes and other taxes. Charitable organizations, including churches and affiliated groups, were forbidden from participating or intervening in, quote, any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. Now, of course, you're probably wondering, why in the world did Lyndon Baines Johnson have this epiphany in 1954 to do this? Well, the amendment is named after then Senator Lyndon Baines Johnson, who introduced the amendment out of concern about the Facts Forum and the Committee for Constitutional Government. Both were tax-exempt organizations that had imitated the tactics of Senator Joseph McCarthy in campaigning against politicians like Johnson, who are more liberal in their political orientation. So in reality, this Johnson amendment was actually intended to stifle free speech instead of allow free speech to continue and be unstifled. The other theory behind this Johnson amendment is that any dark money could have been funneled through local churches or 501c3 organizations and would therefore be tax exempt. And so any amount could be given and it would be tax exempt. And so all I can tell you is this. I do not know of any major churches that I'm aware of in the last 60 plus years that has ever had the Johnson Amendment brought against them, or at least used against them. Now, there might be one or two underling things where, this might have been brought up, but I can tell you that I've been in church services where the pastor has preached pretty intense sermons about pro-life, abortion, the gay movement, transgender movement, what have you. And as far as we are concerned, from our end, we think that they are not only political topics, but of course we believe first and foremost they are biblical topics that must be dealt with from a biblical perspective and not from a secular perspective. So we believe that it's part of our call to talk about those topics. But obviously, Lyndon Johnson did not want churches to speak out against his more liberal policies, especially considering how conservative America was, at least by and large, compared and relative to today in 1954. Now, with that said, why is it, though, that you have a Democrat that put this amendment in order to stifle free speech through the local churches, in order to maintain their 501c3, but yet it seems like every 4 years, Democrats in particular have a huge affinity for what they would call historically black churches in the South, and they go down there and they are in politic mode. Now, in 2008, when Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were both vying for the Democratic nomination, you probably remember this very ear-wrenching rendition from Hillary Clinton from Selma. Would you play that clip for us, Shane?
My friends, we have a march to finish. I will be reintroducing the Count Every Vote Act to ensure that every voter is given the opportunity to vote, that every vote is counted, and each voter is given the chance to verify his or her vote before it is cast and made permanent. We have to stay awake. We have a march to finish. On this Lord's Day, let us say with one voice the words of James Cleveland's great freedom hymn. I don't feel no ways tired. I come too far from where I started from. Nobody told me that the road would be easy. I don't believe he brought me this far to leave me. And we know if we finish this march, what awaits us. St. Paul told us in the letter to the Galatians, let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. The brave men and women of Bloody Sunday did not lose heart.
Shane, put your mic on.
Yes,
now,
sir.
I want just your unvarnished opinion as just a young man listening to Hillary Clinton imitate a black person. Was that ear-wrenching to you?
I find a lot of cries like that. This is from 2008. So nowadays in 2023, it's hard not to hear a politician speaking in a public forum and not have polls in your set. Oh, they're grifting. Oh, they're just saying this to get clout. They're just saying this to get votes their way. But in that case, I feel like the first couple sentences was a little heavy on the accent, and then she may have backed off it, but nonetheless, it could have just been delivered in Hillary Clinton's regular speaking voice without delving into anything.
Which was just as ear-wrenching as what we heard.
Potentially. I will remain neutral as the board op of this show, but I think the accent was a layer too far for me, but I think it evaporated pretty quickly for me to at least let it roll off my back. But I believe we have our caller, so go ahead and get those headphones.
Very good.
on.
I'm glad that you were able to remain neutral, Shane, because I was baiting you ever so slightly there. So
just a little bit. You really set me up there. I did my best to remain politically neutral.
What's interesting, folks, is obviously this is a church setting. This is 2008, and by the way, this happens regularly every 4 years during every federal election. What's his name? The guy over Beto O'Rourke in Texas did the same thing at a local church just before unsuccessfully running for governor against Greg Abbott. And obviously, the church basically endorsed him from the pulpit. It was a mainly black church. But yet, this Johnson Amendment doesn't get used against those churches. Did our caller come in? Okay, great.
Yeah, we're ready to rock.
All right.
I believe I have him on the line, and as soon as you get those headphones on, we'll be good to go.
It is good to welcome back on Politics in the Pulpit, Brad Dacus with the Pacific Justice Institute. Brad, how are you?
Brad, are you there? Are you hearing us? I've got you on and ready to rock. We got you live on air.
Brad is not there.
Well, I've got his call picked up and answered. We've got our phone lines feeding through to the telephone.
Well, we can't be waiting for Brad, Shane.
I know, I was going to say. So, unfortunately, I think we'll have to have him call back in just a second.
Yeah, he'll have to call back. That happens occasionally on live radio, folks. Some of you remember live television back in the day when it didn't matter if a joke bombed, a joke bombed. So that happens occasionally, but that's the great thing about live radio and live feed is we're able to, segue either successfully or unsuccessfully.
It's our own little slice of showtime, right?
Absolutely.
Just a little bit, an hour a day, makes you feel like a rock star.
Absolutely. But back to this notion of the 501c3 status. Now, here's another question I want to ask you. Does a church actually have to file with the Internal Revenue Service in order to be a 501c3 status church or a nonprofit? And the answer to that is no. Churches, by default, are 501c3. I will give you a perfect example. The Freedom's Way Baptist Church has been a 501c3 for 21 years. None of us went to the IRS and filed for 501c3 status. Why? Because all we did was get a tax ID number, and for many years our church was able to essentially give a tax break to those who are giving to our organization.
Hey, Pastor Cook, I'm going to jump in real quick. I believe I have your guest on the line.
Okay.
So let's see if we can go ahead and bring him in this
Live
time.
radio again. Brad with Pacific Justice Institute, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Brad. Well, listen, we had some little hiccups on our end right here. It has nothing to do, of course, with our very amiable board operator, Shane, here. But where are you today, Brad? What's going on?
Well, I'm in Southern California today, and we're just very busy, getting involved and taking on new cases across the country. We now, Pastor Jared, we have over 185 cases in active litigation.
Wow.
And just one of those alone against the city of San Francisco has over 1,000 plaintiffs, employees we're defending who were purged from their work because of their faith and belief. So it's been really intensive, and we have offices now, 31 offices coast to coast in 24 states. And, of course, 6 of those offices are here in California for obvious reasons.
Yeah, because we need the help here in California, no doubt about that. I wanted to have you on today, Brad, because I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of Supreme Court decisions that we had come down a couple weeks ago. And I was going to do this last week, and I didn't have a chance to get to this news, but I'm sure you followed the affirmative action case, the 6-3 court decision on affirmative action, and of course, what does Pacific Justice Institute and what does Brad Dacus in particular believe about that affirmative action decision?
Yeah, well, I personally believe that it's an excellent decision. It's a very strong decision. Many people don't realize the depth and breadth of it. It involved actually 2 universities, Harvard and also University of North Carolina. The reason I point that out is University of North Carolina is a government, public university. So therefore, the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause kicked in and applied because we're dealing with a government entity, government action.
Sure.
And so they looked at that and says, hey, this violates the Equal Protection Clause. It says on its face, you can't engage in race-based discrimination like this, entitled to equal treatment under the law. So it was a very clear case, and on that basis. But then Harvard was a little different animal. It's a private institution. Well, for that, we saw them kick in Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and that applies to entities like universities receiving government funds, government programs. It sort of kicks in the same standard that we have under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So it's a great decision. Now, what is oftentimes people say, oh, that's great, that applies to university admissions. Oh, no. Title VI actually applies to the private sector as well, to any government entity or any private entity that's involved in any kind of a federally funded program, government program, which really actually is a broad net in terms of a lot of large companies across the country. So this is going to be a game changer. Some of these companies with the big ESG, motto and proud of it are going to have to start backpedaling because ESG is something that purports and promotes racist-based policies, giving preference to people strictly and solely based on the color of their skin, not the character and convictions of the individual heart.
Yeah, which of course is a reference there to, or a paraphrase of Martin Luther King's speech, because obviously you and I are not holding our breath in reference to this, but with this Supreme Court decision on affirmative action, we might be moving closer to Martin Luther King's dream of being judged not by the color of one's skin, but by the content of one's character. And for that, we can say amen.
Yeah, exactly. You paraphrased that better than I did, but yes.
Well, I happen to have it right in front of me as well. So, the other court case that obviously was a big success, and again, it was a 6-3 decision. This is something that I'm sure is right up your alley, but the religion, free speech, and the gay rights issue about the web designer in Colorado. And again, Colorado comes up quite often here with these free speech laws. But what say you to this ruling?
Yeah, that's a fantastic decision. Once again, and I want people to understand, when they see the 6-3 decisions, that's only because of the 3 judges that were appointed to the Supreme Court by former President Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. But for that happening, we'd be having a completely different discussion on most of these cases that we're so excited about. It'd be definitely from a different perspective, more from a losing perspective. So this is one of those cases that was definitely impacted. The court found that businesses cannot be required to express themselves in a way that violated what they believe was true. And so if you've got a business that has any kind of a aspect to it involved in expression, speech, like the wedding cake case, that was sent back to to Portland. The sweet, I think it's sweet cake case. And they said, in view of this case of dealing with the graphic design case, rehear this case, reconsider it based on our precedent. So it's going to affect not just web designers or that are doing weddings, but it's also going to apply to virtually any kind of business involving individual expression, customized expression. It could be a T-shirt place. It could be all kinds of businesses where there's that custom expressive element involved. But it's actually even broader than that, because the court went very, very broad on this one. They cited the case out of West Virginia where the Supreme Court says you can't compel a child to say the Pledge of Allegiance if it violates their conscience and what they believe. And I think it was the Jehovah's Witness case, if I'm not mistaken. So, they had religious convictions, but the court didn't look at religion as much as they did free speech, which is broader, much broader. So we're looking to apply this language not just for faith-based businesses or businesses with owners who have convictions, not to support something they don't agree with, but also to help defend even more college students being required to write a paper in favor of a topic that violates their conscience, high school students, kids in elementary school. It's a very very broad decision, and we are looking to use it in many potential ways moving forward, including cases dealing perhaps with pronouns and people being required to use certain pronouns. If it involves this kind of the government or any kind of a civil rights issue and element, it's going to really play out, I think, very well to our favor.
In many ways, I was thinking if this free speech ruling did not occur via 6-3, in many ways it could have potentially opened up the floodgates of people walking into a Jewish-owned delicatessen and saying, "Hey, I'd like a pound of bacon and 2 pounds of pork chops." And the Jewish delicatessen looks at the guy and says, "Hey, we're a Jewish delicatessen. We don't serve pork," Or you walk into a halal, owned, Muslim-owned delicatessen, and the same thing. If this ruling did not happen the way it happened, is it possible the government could have come in and basically compelled Jewish delicatessens to serve pork chops?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. That's just that kind of intolerance that could have been crammed down the throats of people in those situations of those faiths and convictions. This is it's so valuable because we live in a society today where, in the public accommodation doctrine, their government's trying to force businesses to do things and open their doors to entities or to individuals that are bringing in something that violates their conscience. And this really gives a lot of very strong, broad protection in that regards. And it is very broad, and everyone of every faith should appreciate this, because this pushes tolerance and accommodation. No one with a truly tolerant attitude would want to compel anyone to violate their faith and religious convictions. That is, unless they're part of a radical LGBTQ agenda, which is probably the most intolerant agenda going forward in the United States today.
No doubt. When we come back on Politics in the Pulpit, Brad, I want to get your quick take on the Johnson Amendment as passed in 1954 by then Senator LBJ, and get your thoughts about the possibility of maybe upending that amendment in the future. Of course, we know that former President Donald Trump tried to do that back in 2017, 2018. It was unsuccessful, but I'd like to get your take on it and the hypocrisy of the left using churches during campaign seasons when we come back here on your hometown station on Politics in the Pulpit. Every once in a while, he's gracious enough to call in when at the behest of Pastor Cook, of course. And we were just talking about the two great Supreme Court decisions that came down the pike a couple of weeks ago. But I wanted to turn my attention to a rant that I was going through during the first half hour of the show, and that's about the 501c3 status of churches and tax-exempt organizations. Is it true, Brad, that a church is by default 501c3? They don't necessarily have to file with the IRS, or is that a fault?
Yeah. We would contend, for practical purposes, that it is basically implicit and automatic if the church is laying claim to the tax exempt status and the privileges under 501c3. That said, there is a legal avenue to take that some have used to argue the same tax advantages and yet be separate from the potential restrictions that may come in to play later down the road with 501c3. Our position is right now there's no need to even go down that potential avenue because the restrictions that may come against regarding 501c3 would not that people are concerned about would not be upheld as constitutional by the Supreme Court.
Well, I have an article here that says IRS has occasionally taken enforcement action under the Johnson Amendment, and I have here, it says the government did withdraw the tax-exempt status of the church at Pierce Creek in Vestal, New York, after it ran a full-page advertisement against the election of Bill Clinton in 1992, a decision that was upheld in both a U.S. district and in the D.S. appellate courts, Branch Ministries versus Rosati.
Yes.
Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. And let me just make a distinction because there is the Johnson Amendment is not all constitutional. It's the extent to which it, for example, prevents the church from voicing its position on a candidate for or against a candidate or a pastor doing so. We believe that's unconstitutional. Hundreds of pastors have done that, put it on DVDs years ago, sent it to the IRS. They had hundreds of these. The IRS didn't move on a single one because they knew if they did, this would go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court would strike that down as unconstitutional. The IRS wants to still maintain its intimidation powers. So it has not moved on any of those, not one. However, where it does come into play, and the Johnson Amendment I think would survive constitutional scrutiny potentially, is the extent to which a church uses its money, its finances, to push or promote a candidate for office. That is where the issue comes into play. Now, they can actually use money and their facilities and their time in a non-substantial manner to support legislation and to lobby for legislation. They can do that. That's up to between 5 and 15%. They have unlimited usage to address issues in terms of their resources, whether it's abortion or whatever it may be. But when it comes to candidates, that will likely be upheld as constitutional with regards to limiting churches' use of church money that was written off as a donation to the church for purposes of pushing a candidate for office. That is that's the issue that churches need to be careful not to cross.
And that would be the so-called dark money that is coming into churches that would be tax exempt, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Charitable money, tithing money. Now, mind you, a church can have their own separate political action committee, and that has to be money given from the individuals in the church or people directly to that PAC fund, not from the church to the PAC fund.
Gotcha.
And so churches can have their own PAC if they want. They can even have their own C4 if they want to put forth more than just a insubstantial part of their total resources for lobbying. They want something that's really going to do heavy-duty lobbying. They can set up a C4. We at Pacific Justice Institute, we have a C3. We have 2 C3s and a C4, and so we know exactly the left and right-hand turns. We'd be more than happy to assist any church out there wishing to know how to maneuver in regard to these different structures.
I would love to start a Freedom's Way super PAC, and maybe we could talk about that sometime in the future, Brad. Maybe we can have lunch, and it's on you.
Yes, that'd be great. I know a great McDonald's. I can still get the 2-for-1 special. So yes, let's do that.
Well, obviously, knowing that Grimace's anniversary or birthday has just happened, so that's always an exciting thing. I wanted to talk briefly about continuing about this Johnson Amendment and the utter hypocrisy of. Obviously, we know that LBJ was a Democrat and died a Democrat, obviously, but yet it seems to be Democrats that are the ones that are going against their own amendment here, because every 4 years Democrats will flock to predominantly historically black churches, specifically down south, and will basically politic from the pulpits. And many of these churches will endorse or disendorse folks right from their pulpit. During the first half hour of the show, I played the old 2008 clip of Hillary Clinton down in Selma where she's imitating the black preacher. What say you about the hypocrisy of the left and their breaching of the Johnson Amendment?
Yeah, it is obvious hypocrisy, and black churches are not treated with the same respect, I think, as many other churches. And I say that with firsthand information. I've spoken at black churches before, and wonderful Christians, and it was great opportunities. Well, one time I was guest preaching, and Governor Schwarzenegger I was told he was there, and he's going to speak before I do, and then other politicians in the back are going to be recognized, and then they'll be there for the first hymn, and then they'll all walk out. And I looked at him, and I told the pastor, I said, "What? You mean they're going to walk out after the first hymn?" I said, don't you see, isn't that insulting? It seems to me like that. I mean, he goes, "Yes." He says, "But we're a black church, so they think they can get away with that." And I was stunned. And, to see that, that aspect of it as well.
Yeah.
But, yeah, the reality is, though, with the Supreme Court that we have today, I believe that churches should feel fairly free to allow different people, politicians, to come in and address their congregations. I would just put in a qualifier that if a church does that, the pastor, when they introduce them, should say, we as a 501c3, our church does not use our resources to endorse any candidate. Nonetheless, we have this person here who would like to address our church. And I think that little bit of a qualifier would be just one or two steps away from the edge of the cliff. And as an attorney, we always like our clients to take at least one or two steps back, just in case.
No doubt. This last minute here on the show, I'm going to give you the last 10, 15 seconds here. Tell us a little bit about how folks can get a hold of Pacific Justice Institute and support you.
You bet. If they'd like to get a hold of us and support our work, or they like information on our big celebration of justice, October 28th, with Kaylee McEnany in Anaheim, just go to pji.org. That's pji.org. pji.org.
Thank you so much, Brad, for calling in today. And again, great information. Thanks again for taking a stand here, in particular for the state of California. You're listening to Politics in the Pulpit. We will catch you next week when we have former State Senator Mike Morrell on the program. Take care.